Hello everybody and welcome back from coffee. I'm Andrea Bedard-Smith. I'm chair of the British Standards Society. I was also chair of the UK Technical Committee EDI 337 Gender Equality, which is why I'm moderating this session today. So this is about standards for women. I think to me there are two different sorts of things covered here. There are making all standards accessible for everybody, women in particular, as this is our topic, but also standards that help women in their daily lives, in their work. So a couple of things about women just to kick us off. 5 out of 10 women globally are integrated into the labour market compared with 9 out of 10 men, which is a huge loss in talent and opportunity. Worldwide, women only make 77% of every dollar that men get for work of equal value. Women continue to be underrepresented in governing bodies and positions of power. Paid and unpaid labour is unequally distributed, with women and girls spending more time on unpaid care and domestic work than men and boys. Nearly 1 in 3 women worldwide report experiencing physical or sexual violence or psychological violence in their lifetime, including at work. So that's some of the issues. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to tell you a little bit about my speakers and then hand over to our first speaker. So today we've got with us Karen Lindmark, Head of International Relations at SIS, the Swedish Institute for Standards, and a member of the European Standardization Technical Board since 2022. Karen has been at SIS since 2016 and has more than 20 years' experience in different management positions. She studied mechanical engineering. Excellent. Karen is passionate about international cooperation and process development, keen on ensuring that processes and rules are truly inclusive. Believes diversity and gender representation is important. Okay, I seem to be having a little bit of a... Does that stop? Yes. Okay. Believes diversity and gender representation is important, but language and gender responsiveness in standards we write is what she focuses on at present. She is co-convener of ISO-IEC Joint Advisory Group on Gender Responsive Standards since 2020. Dennis Rothwicz is a legal expert on gender equality and women's rights, specialising in combating violence against women and discrimination. He was the chair of ISO PC 337 Gender Equality. He works for the Minister, is a Minister Delegate for Gender Equality, Diversity and Equal Opportunities and Regional Director of Women's Rights and Gender Equality in the Grand East region of France up until January this year. And our third speaker will be talking to us online, and she's Alicia Page. She's director of a social enterprise organisation called Bloody Good Employers, working closely with organisations to improve their policy, culture and communications around menstrual health in the workplace. Alicia also supports the internal team of the parent charity Bloody Good Period in their work for getting period products and education to refugees, asylum seekers and those who need it across the UK. Alicia was one of the members of the BSITC who created BS 30416, Menstruation and Menstrual Health and Menopause Guidance in the Workplace. So those are our speakers today. I'm very grateful to all of them for coming along. And so I'm now going to hand over to our first speaker, Karen.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me speak on such an important topic. I think that gender responsive standards, as I will be explaining, is key to especially the users, because we want to write standards that are equally usable for all parties, be it a man or a woman. So as Andrea was saying, normally I work at SIS, the Swedish Institute for Standards, where I am in charge of international relations. But in this context, I'm here because I'm also the co-convener of the JSAG, the Joint Strategic Advisory Group of ISO and IEC on gender responsive standards. Next, please. So I traveled here today, not with a suitcase, because I'm only here for the day, but Do you remember when suitcases had no wheels? It was not very long ago. Well, everything is relative, but I say 30, 40 years ago when they started making wheels on suitcases. So why is this interested in this context? Well, I think, my idea is that the suitcases were not carried by women. So the suitcases were products for men. The suitcases, women would travel with their husband or a partner, and that partner, that usually stronger, taller man, would carry their luggage. What happened was that women started traveling on their own with their own suitcases and wanted to be able to carry them themselves, which was not possible. I mean, at least I, for one, often fill my suitcase to the maximum, and it's not only heavy, but it's also big. So I think that when the society realized that there is a different need for different genders, they started thinking, okay, what do we do about the suitcases? And it happens in standardization as well. So standards now have, the standards on suitcases now have wheels in their scope. But I think that is a key sort of point here, which I'm trying to make, that we develop standards because of the need of the users. And if the users are not both men and women, we write standards that are biased or that only work for one of the sexes. Next, please. So this is why this is so important for ISO and IEC, and that they have committed to this quest, as I call it. Writing gender responsive standards is something that is important for the entire community. It's based on the idea that all standards need to work for everyone. We have been working since 2020. We're still at it because this is a huge awareness building exercise. We have produced guidance materials and training materials, how to use those guides. We also have included suggestions of automation. We heard Philip and Sergio talk about our digital transformation. I hope and think that the digital transformation can be of use for the gender responsiveness as well, because it will make it easier to use the correct language and make sure we ask the right questions. But I do think that this is still very much unknown, not only by the people that write the standards, but the people that use the standards. We take the standards for granted. We all in this room agree that standards are great, but are they really fit for purpose for all humankind? So I think that this is a responsibility for all. So what we have landed in one of the definitions on gender is the idea that gender questions need to be, or gender issues need to be catered when writing the standards. And what we mean by that is that standards do not need to be gender neutral, but they need to be a standard that acknowledges the distinct needs of different genders and that take action to ensure that it works equally well for all. So why, I think that many of you, in this context, we talk about women. And I think in many countries, gender is broader than male, female. And let me assure you, we are not saying that that is not the case, but we want to, in the international context where we work, we need to start at a point where everyone is in agreement. And we are all in agreement that there are differences between male and female genders. Then there are other genders as well, but if we write standards that work equally well for men and women, I'm sure they will be working well for the other genders as well. So this is key for me to sort of convey in the work we're doing. So when you talk about gender responsive standards, you often talk about, and I did too when I started, I talked about the size, the shape, and the strength of the different sexes. But there is so much more. And this is, I think, why we still have the awareness issue, because many people in the standardization world, they say, well, we're only developing products. It doesn't matter what gender they're written for. But let me give you a few examples of other issues that are not related to the strength or the size. For instance, body responses. When you talk about radiation, it is known that female bodies and male bodies have different reactions to radiation. Is this taken care of when we write the standards? So that is one issue. The new technology, I think AI is a fantastic tool, but we need to be really careful. What does the AI feed our systems with? Is that data that comes from AI, is that based on only male thoughts? Voice recognition is one important thing where we've noticed, where we've seen that if you only use male voices, you might not recognize a high-pitched female voice. And what would that imply if you, for instance, drive a car and you talk to the car and the car doesn't recognize your voice if it's a high-pitched voice? So we need to make sure that what we use from AI and from the technology, that data works, is equally distributed. We also talk a lot about the data. We need data when we write standards. We base standards writing on the data we have. If we do not know what that data consists of, we cannot be sure that it's correct. Let's say that the data we took from a human samples, for instance, would be only male samples or only female. If we do not know that, we cannot make sure that what we write is correct. So this is important. And the third one is, or the fourth one, is the test methods we use. In the old days, we used to make tests on humans. To some extent, this can, in some cases, be really dangerous. So we have committees that have said, okay, we know we made these tests on male individuals only, but we do not want to redo the test for women because they're too dangerous. So we need to make sure that the test methods available work. Could we use virtual? Could we use AI in that context? So it's important. Can we use non-human methods to make sure that we have the broad test audience, or test monkeys, I would say in Swedish, but that's another key. So these are examples of why this is not only a question of size and shape, but a lot of data, a lot of where we get our information from. Next, please. So these are two documents I wanted to share with you. Hopefully some of you have seen them already. This is the one to the left, is the gender responsive standard guidance that we have developed within the JSAG. It is on purpose quite simplified, making this hopefully an attractive document for people that would normally not read a booklet on gender responsive standards, have them open that booklet just because it looks nice, it has some examples. So. And then the other one is the UN ECE guidance on the same subject. These two documents, they complement each other. To put light on a few of the differences, the gender responsive one that we have written is more on, we talk a little bit more on data that I mentioned now, whereas the UN ECE guide talks more about inclusiveness and representation. So why have we not talked about inclusiveness and representation in the JSAG? First of all, it was not in our mandate, but I have one thing that sometimes provokes reactions, because I think it's important not to mix the two. I have heard technical managers and technical experts saying, well, we've got women in our group, so we're fine. And to me, this is doing the completely wrong thing, because it's not the woman on the group that guarantees that the standard is gender responsive. It is the full team effort that makes a standard gender responsive. So by saying that as long as we get a woman in the group, we will be writing gender responsive standards, it's not only unfair, it's also difficult, because some of the women might not want to take on that responsibility. So that's why we're trying to make this a saying, of course, diversity, diversity, young, old, different culture and so on, is always important, because that will make us write a better standard. But in this case, I think that the gender responsiveness needs to be the responsibility of all involved. I also think that we do have we often, this is again, in this context, we're talking about women, but I think we do have committees on the other end of the scale, where in medical devices, for instance, in some of the committees, there is a large female overload. So, I mean, this is, and we wouldn't say, okay, we have a man on the group, so we're fine. So I think this is key. And I do think it's also important to recognize there are also gender responsiveness going the other way. For instance, one example I like to use is color blindness. Color blindness is far more usual in the male population. Do we think of that when we do the graphs, the pictograms in the standards? So I think gender responsiveness is often a woman's issue, but it could very well be the other way around. So just a few things that we have developed. This is a slide from our colleagues at SEC, this Standards Council of Canada. These are questions that they ask the committees to use when writing to make people think. So one question you could start by asking, will men and women be impacted by the standard? I would say the answer to that is yes, in almost, or I would say in any standard. Is it possible that there may be different impacts for men and women? Is there sufficient data to assess potential gender impacts of the standard? What assumptions are being made in the standard? What are the limitations of those assumptions? Again, I bring you back to the suitcases without wheels, that we are all strong enough to carry one. And men and women are not homogeneous groups, but are further modifications needed to make the standard suitable for diverse men and women? Because I think that is another issue. I mean, men and women, we're simplifying things by dividing us into big groups, one with strong, big men and one with small, weak women. I mean, this is of course not the case, but I think these questions are fairly simple, but they do make you think. But we need the committees, we need our users to start thinking of them. So I hope that this information is thought provocative. I hope that some of the things that I've said are new to you. I do hope that you will help us spread the word. I do think that the user input is needed here. I know that the panel before me, they spoke of user cases. I think this is an extreme case of needing user cases, because we are seeing again that this is not something that is easily thought of. But when you use the standards, I'm sure you've experienced, man or woman, this standard doesn't work very well for me. Well, then throw that back at us as standard developers, talk about it, and give proof why it's not working. Because I think that gender responsive standards are relevant to all of us, and most likely it's affecting every single standard we write. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Very thought-provoking. Please keep a note of any questions that you might have for Karen, because we'll have a question and answer session after all the three speakers have spoken. So thanks again, Karen. Very, very thought-provoking. So our next speaker is Dennis Rothschild. So I will pass over to Dennis.
Sorry. Good morning, everybody. First, thank you, Karen, because we are really in line with what you say. Really, thank you. Just to introduce very shortly myself, I'm Dennis Rothschild. I'm the chair of the ISO 53800. Sorry, it's a bit long, but the title is also long. It is also long because the title is Guideline for the Promotion and Implementation of Equality and Women's Empowerment. Sorry, but it's necessary to have some details. As chair of the ISO 53800, my role was to monitor the work carried out by the French National Standards Commission and to lead the project with the support of AFNOR and the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, which is in fact the project manager. My main responsibility were those of any chair, you know, and a bit more. That is to say, firstly, to manage a project committee work program in line with objectives and deadlines, to manage, secondly, the work in terms of costs, the resource and risk, while, of course, ensuring the quality and scope of the project. Let's start by the first question. Maybe previous one. Yeah. What are the objectives of the ISO 53800? In other words, what is the background of this draft standard? And what are the issues surrounding the project? Equality between men and women, or women and men, sorry, I don't learn you, is a subject that has grown in importance in recent years. The UN has made it one of its sustainable development goals, number 5, and French President Emmanuel Macron has declared it the major cause of his 2 mandates. In September 2021, at France's instigation, the International Organization of Standardization approved the creation of a project committee dedicated to equality between women and men, whose aim is to create the first international standard on the subject. The international standard project was led by AFNOR, with our Ministry of Equality, my ministry, sorry, and the Ministry of Europe, and also with the Ministry of Economy and Finance. The aim of the draft, next step, the aim of the draft standard is to support public authorities in implementing the Biarritz Partnership for Gender Equality and to position France as an international leader in this field. Just to remind you shortly, what is the Biarritz Partnership? France held the presidency on the G7 summit of heads of state and government in Biarritz in August 2019. France promotes gender equality, resulting in a declaration of gender equality, women's empowerment, and a set of recommendations. This declaration is known as the Biarritz Partnership. However, one question could be asked, why use, in fact, voluntary standardization to implement this partnership? It's an issue, but not the only solution. The answer is because the aim, and you tell it to us, the answer is because the aim of standardization is to jointly seek and establish with mutual respect and under acceptable economic conditions a satisfactory solution to the organizational and technical issues to which the standard will provide an answer. The goal of the project is to raise the awareness of structures and in particular employers at a global level in order to advance the construction of egalitarian and inclusive societies, particularly in countries less advanced on this subject than France. The aim is to establish collaboration with other countries and mobilize the Francophonie network to develop a French-initiated international standard. in concrete terms, the aim of this draft ISO center is to provide organizations, both public and private, with guidance for the promotion and implementation of gender equality and women's empowerment in their strategy, action, and international operation. It was developed by an international group of over 50 experts working as part of the project committee on guidelines for the promotion and implementation of gender equality. This is a French initiative of international scope, with international works to be launched in 2021, and the French initiative within the framework of feminist diplomacy, which is a French and Sweden principle, and the standard to be published in 2024, which is the case. The project was jointly supported by the Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, the Ministry for Gender Equality, and the Ministry of Economy and Finance, and of course with AFNOR. How were things done? Yeah, sorry. Where are we now? After a little more than 2 years of work, more than 1,200 commands, yes, received and resolved 3 face-to-face meetings, sometimes a bit, let's say, stressful, in Paris, London, and Madrid, and several intense online discussions, really intense online discussions, with the ISO working group. The first international standard, ISO 53800, was published in May 2024. The document provides guidelines on how to approach the issue of equality between women and men in the organizations along the following lines: international operations such as governance, relations and working conditions, international stakeholder, you have it on the slide, financial operations, stakeholder relations, and international and external communication. Next slide. Now, what is ISO 53800? Gender equality means the achievement of equal rights, responsibility and opportunity of women and men and girls and boys, such that no one is disadvantaged. The ISO standard focuses on the equality resulting from the hierarchical organization of gender-specific roles assigned to women and men, girls and boys. It provides very concretely guidance on how to promote and implement gender equality and women empowerment. Secondly, guidelines for organizations to develop the capability to achieve a culture of gender equality and women's empowerment, and a framework such as resource, policies, and tools and good practice enabling contextualization, promotion and implementation of gender equality. Next slide. So why is ISO 53800 so important for us? Gender equality is not a women issue, you said it, but should concern everyone and every organization. It should be seen both as a human rights issue and a precondition for an indicator for sustainable people-centered development. Indeed, despite the real progress that has been made, gender equality, inequality, and discrimination against women and girls still remains very prevalent and in all walks of life and in every country. To cite just a few examples, 5 out of 10 women worldwide is integrated in the labor market compared to with 9 out of 10 men. Still, once employed women worldwide only make 77 persons for every dollars earned by men, etc., etc. Finally, according to the estimate of the World Health Organization, almost 1 out of 3 women worldwide has been the victim of physical or sexual violence during their lives, not to mention the psychological, economic, and social form of violence. Next, Yaku. 2 questions to end this speech. Who is the standard aimed at? The answer is all organizations, public and private, capable of putting the standard into practice. What benefit does it bring? Well, it has been demonstrated that combating inequality leads to positive economic and social development for the organization in question. And the aim of ISO 53800 is to integrate this approach into the organization corporate social responsibility policies. Let me answer to a question to conclude. Many people ask me, why is this standard focused exclusively on equality between women and men? That's a really frequent question. Why does it address the issue of gender, or why doesn't it address the issue of gender equality? Well, in fact, the idea was to establish a minimum common base that could be accepted and above all, integrate by as many states and as many organizations as possible. That's the end of my speech. I can answer your question. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Again, if you would keep your questions for the question and answer session at the end, once our last speaker has a presentation. So online we have Alicia Page. You want to Hello, Alicia. Hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Okay, I'm handing over to you.
Thank you. Do you want me to? Yeah, is it easier if maybe I share my screen? Are you able to put this on full screen, or is it better if I do it?
At the moment, I think we can't put the link you sent me onto full screen. Do you want to try and share your screen and see if that works?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Screen. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, can you see that? There's a little bit of a tab at the top, but hopefully you can see most of that. And just to check, you can all hear me okay, yes?
Yes, we're fine. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, lovely to meet you all. And yeah, I'm really pleased to be here. Sad that I'm not there in person because I would have loved to have been in Paris today. But yeah, I'm here in the UK in London at the moment. So I'm here to talk about the BS 30416, which is the menstruation, menstrual health and menopause in the workplace guide. And it is a guidance, it's not a standard. I believe it's in the process of trying to become a standard, but I don't work for BSI. I was a panelist, and so I don't know the full process and where we're at with that. Yeah, it's a guidance that was put together by over 40 panel members, all with different experience when it comes to this area, and yeah, has been really popular. It's now also award winning, which is really great. So we're hoping and have ambitions that this will become a standard in the future. Can I just check what time I need to finish? this presentation, just because I don't think the timings are aligning up as I thought they would, just so I don't run over.
Okay, Alicia. You have until 12:45. I mean, we're running a little early, so you've got quite a while.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think we're on 11:45 your time. Is that right?
So yes, I'm not going to take that time. I've only prepared 20 minutes because that's the slot that I was prepared for. So yeah, maybe we'll finish a lot earlier then, because I know we are running early anyway. Cool, that's okay. But I'll take my time. And if I go over 20 minutes, then I know I've got that time. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit more slowly, because not everybody here has English as the first language. Thank you.
Yes, of course, no problem. Sorry about that. Okay, great. I will get started then. So, Bloody Good Employers is on a mission to create fairer, safer workplaces for your employees and for all women and people who menstruate. So I'm the director of Bloody Good Employers, and we are a social enterprise here in the UK, which means that we are a company that exists for a social mission. We donate all of our profit to our parent charity, which is called Bloody Good Periods. And the work that we do there is to get period products and education to refugees, asylum seekers, and those who need it across the UK. Is that pacing okay before I carry on, or do you want me to talk a bit slower?
Yes, I've gathered that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. So I'll start off with an introduction into who I am and what my role is here, so that you can understand my involvement in helping to develop the guide. So I'm Alicia Page. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a director of Bloody Good Employers, and I also work for the charity as well as development director. I was a panel member for the guide. And I also have lived experience of a menstrual health condition, which is called adenomyosis. Lots of people might not have heard of that, but you might have heard of endometriosis, which is a more commonly known about condition, but still, I would say, not very well known about. What this means is that I deal with heavy bleeding and severe pain 1 to 2 days per period. I also have quite long periods as well, which can last up to 8 days. I didn't start having symptoms until I started this work, which is very interesting, but it further fuels my activism and desire for change when it comes to menstrual health broadly, but specifically in the workplace. I know firsthand from my time working in patriarchal and male-dominated environments the stress and anxiety that can come with having to manage your period and difficult symptoms in the workplace. And I am not alone. So our research showed that 89% of people, all of this data is based in the UK, had experienced anxiety or stress in the workplace due to their period. The underlying reasons for this really vary, from people feeling the need to hide or conceal the fact that they're on their period, or fear of leaking and being found out to be on their period, and also to a smaller but very significant percentage of people feeling that they didn't have free access to toilets or breaks whilst at work, which of course is a really big problem when you're having your period at work. We do work in lots of different industries, and in particular, these issues crop up in the rail industry. So train drivers, for example, not always having access to toilets and breaks when they need it. Also within construction, a very male-dominated environment, very often working in remote areas without access to toilets. But also there are reports of this happening in schools, so teachers not being able to access toilets when they need them, or the design of schools meaning that Toilets that have access to period products or women's or females' bathrooms are at the opposite end of the school, meaning that teachers don't have time in between their lessons to go to the bathroom to deal with their menstrual health symptoms. 25% of people had felt like their career progression had been negatively impacted by taking time off for reasons related to menstrual health. It's really important for us to consider this when we hear about organisations and employers making commitments to improve gender equity and to get more women into leadership positions. What this tells us is that if you have those targets, yet 25% of people are feeling that their career progression is being negatively impacted, then that is going to impact having a equitable leadership team. And here are some of the experiences that were shared as part of the research that we did. So the one person said, a male colleague had joked that I've been PMSing. If we just to explain what that means. So before your period, there can be an experience which is called premenstrual stress, premenstrual syndrome, which can include different symptoms such as mood differences, fatigue, also physical symptoms, increased hunger, those sorts of things. So what this person here is saying that a male colleague had joked about that, which made them feel very uncomfortable because their period does greatly affect their mental health and at times can be extremely painful. Somebody else said, I don't take sick leave for menstrual issues. I use annual leave when I need to, probably 5 to 8 days a year. I feel a bit ashamed of this because I should be braver about my periods. So what we're seeing here is that jokes in the workplace speak to a culture that isn't supporting people and can create stress and anxiety. That we have people using valuable annual leave, holiday time for their period because they can't have open conversations with people at work. So it goes to show how this isn't just about policies, education, awareness and culture is really important too. And recently, a report found in the UK that £3.25 billion is the cost of days work lost due to period inequity in the UK every year, with 1 in 5 people saying that they miss work with most or every period. So this isn't just a problem for employees, it is within organisational interest to address these issues. Okay, so that was just to frame a bit of the problem, why we're here, why we do this work, and why this guide is needed. Now I'm going to talk through some aspects of the guide in more detail. So menstruation and menopause in the workplace is the name of the guide. As I've said, it's a guide, it's not yet a standard. It centres an intersectional and inclusive approach that will benefit far beyond supporting only those experiencing menstruation and menopause. So in the guide itself, the whole first section is around providing language around how to have inclusive conversations, and intersectionality is baked throughout. So what intersectionality means is that we are not only considering the experience of a white woman, we are considering the different experiences that people have based on their backgrounds, their lived experiences, their cultural experiences, and how that might impact the different support and experiences that they have when it comes to menstruating or experiencing menopause in the workplace. We recognise and explain the power of shame and stigma in limiting workplace support for menstruation and menopause. So a big problem, a big barrier to being able to get support around menstrual health in the workplace is that people don't feel like they can talk about menstrual health in the workplace. People don't feel supported, and there is a lot of shame and embarrassment around this topic. So in the guide, we take time to talk about that and to address that and explain that that is a really important thing that needs to be resolved before some of the practical guidance that exists within the guide can be implemented. And we consider various forms of support from the perspective of panelists with expertise across menstruation, menopause, human resources, diversity and inclusion, occupational health and safety, LGBTQ plus inclusion, disability inclusion, and legal issues across both academia and business. I'll be honest, the guide was very difficult to write, but what that means is that because we had so many different people with lots of different experiences, and we know the purpose of the guide is to, try and all come to a cohesive output. But I think those different perspectives and those different experiences and the challenges along the way really made the output much better. Okay, so there's lots of information in the guide, and I'm not going to be able to go through all of it, but here is an overview of the key areas, and I will talk through each of these areas. So we have this graphic, which is meant to bring together all of the information in the guide into one easy way, easy place to see what needs to be done. So we have, I'll start in the middle with practical actions, and these are across policy guidance, work design, supportive workplace cultures, role adjustments, and physical aspects of work. And then on the left here, we have an inclusive approach, and on the right, we have evaluation and metrics. So what that means is that these practical actions the actions to take can be categorized in these areas, but an inclusive approach is really important in all of these areas, and making sure that there are metrics in place and that these are being evaluated. Okay, so I'll focus on the first section, so policy guidance. So to consider how policy changes can be implemented into existing policies. For example, diversity and inclusion, performance management, sickness and absence, and flexible working. There are pros and cons to having a policy, a standalone policy. So, for example, a menstrual health policy or a period policy or a menopause policy. The pro is that it's easily accessible and clear to see that there is support available from the organisation. But on the negative side, it can isolate menstrual and menopausal health, meaning that women and people who menstruate may face more barriers during employment. By embedding menstrual health considerations into existing policies, it's good to be pragmatic and for sustainability, so you don't get into the routine of creating a brand new policy every time something new comes up. And will also allow you to understand how changes for the support that you put together for menstrual health can be used to support other areas, for example, critical or long-term illness, and just to be generally more inclusive. Some of the provisions that you'll put in place will be beneficial for many other people, not just women and people who menstruate. It's really important to also consider how policies are communicated, making sure that they're easily accessible and that managers and HR teams know how to use the policies in practice when supporting team members. Okay, now on to supportive workplace cultures. So to consider providing adequate training and resources for line managers and supervisors, including education around the diversity of experiences, and also to clearly define how the senior leadership team is accountable and responsible for implementing the approach to supporting employees through menstruation, menstrual health, and perimenopause and menopause. It's important that line managers know how to support people with their menstrual health needs, and senior leadership play an important role. If you have a policy in place, but that isn't supported in real life, then people won't be taking the support that's technically available to them. So it's really important to make sure we have policies and a culture that supports it as well. The physical aspect of work, so to consider the ease of access to toilets or shower facilities, and where possible, some self-contained facilities with wash basins, so sinks inside the cubicles, and providing easy and free access to menstrual products, pads, tampons, as well as disposable bins in all toilets and changing facilities. So the purpose for having access to a self-contained toilet facility is useful for using more sustainable products such as menstrual cups, so that they can be washed and replaced. And we at Bloody Good Period are advocating for, we believe that period products should be freely available, not just in the workplace, but in society generally. And that is what we're campaigning for across the UK as part of our campaigning work as a charity. Role adjustments, so consider personal protective equipment, making sure it's comfortable, fitting, and when needed, limit time wearing, and ensure that alternative uniforms are available. So where people need to wear protective equipment, we already know that they can be ill-fitting for women because they're designed usually in male sizes. This can also have an impact for people who are having their period, but also who are perimenopausal or menopausal as well. Making sure that there are sufficient breaks and privacy to attend menstrual needs, for example, during long shifts. So I already talked about train drivers, for example. They don't have enough time to go to the toilet and change period products between their journeys. Work design, provide ways to take time out during the day, for example, by splitting breaks. So if there is only so much time for breaks, allowing flexibility for how those breaks are taken and when they're taken. Also the possibility of options for flexible leave that allow an employee to work longer hours on some days and use accumulated hours to have a day off or shorter days when needed. It's different for everybody, but the menstrual cycle with it does have fluctuations in terms of hormones and energy levels. Everybody's different, but there is lots of evidence to show that people tend to have more energy and be more productive in the earlier times of their cycle, whereas at other times they might experience fatigue and pain. So being able to shift hours to suit your cycle is a very inclusive way of working, rather than working in this rigid 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, or a similar pattern throughout the whole cycle. Thinking about actually how can you split your hours across, for example, 30 a month, for example. Okay, and then the guide itself, it has been downloaded over 7,000 times across 100 countries. And as I said, it won an award earlier this year, which we're really pleased about. And it is in the process, I believe, of going down the route of becoming a standard. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the work that we do, just to bring that to life a bit more. So on the panel, as I said, it was a very diverse group, and there are some of us who actually are providing support to organisations around periods, menstrual health and menopause. So these are some of the people that we've worked with in delivering, some of the employers who are, really leading the way in the UK, and working with us to improve their support around menstrual health. Really what I wanted to illustrate here is that this work should be used in all sectors of all sizes. So we have the rail industry on there, we have the National Health Service, we have charities, big and small. We have borough councils, so public sector organisations, as well as bigger corporates in the finance space, for example. And then what we do is we work with employers over the course of 12 months, so a year, to deliver an accreditation programme. And then we also help employers talk about periods in the workplace and help get period products into the workplace. By the end of working with us, an employer has a comfortable environment to talk openly about menstrual and menopausal health. They're providing access to period products for staff. They have inclusive policies, measures in place to alleviate stress and anxiety, and they're providing access to training and resources for staff. And what is really amazing about this work and the guide is that, yes, it is about how workplaces can be more inclusive, but because of the nature of this topic, and we know that society more broadly has a lot of work to do to become more inclusive, it can really inspire activism in people. So the employers that have engaged with the programme are also getting involved in wider campaigning to support the ask for free period products for everybody who needs them. Our public sector organisations that we're working with are not only making change internally and using the guide to make change internally, but also thinking about how they can extend that to support people within their community. And that's me. Thank you, merci. I hope I didn't go through that too quickly. But yeah, that's me. And if you'd like to get in touch, then my email address is there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Alicia, for that presentation. It's refreshing for me to hear about periods and menopause and talked about in such an open and inclusive way. Thank you very much. Just to let you know, one of my colleagues who is here, you'll be pleased to hear, has said that it is actually a full British standard, but a guide or a specification. And just to let colleagues in the room and online know that it is actually available free of charge from BSI's website. So if anybody wants to download a copy, doesn't matter where you are, you can. So anyway, after that bit of promotion, I'm going to open the floor to questions. So if you would like to ask a question, whether it's in the room or online, those people online can raise your hand. Can we let's see the people on there? So if you would like to ask a question, please could you raise your hand? Good.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to hear the presentation, and actually I have two questions, and I was currently in GSAC team for over 1 year, and we are all aware of the importance of gender responsive gender, but during the communication, when I was with experts in ISO and IEC, we found that the awareness enhancement still need to be done, and we found that this year, and ISO and IEC have launched experts are required to finish the GSAG inclusive. We provided some deadline for experts to finish, but we're still thinking we need more to do. So, and such here, and we want to see that is it possible that we introduce the self-assessment of GSAC, gender responsive self-assessment form. We introduced at early stage of development of our standards. Maybe it's not a requirement. I mean, the mandatory process is a suggestion for the WG to considering that if their standards are gender responsive, is that possible? Is there any possibility to for us? Because for GSAG, we are trying to provide some support on guidelines and to help our experts to standard gender responsive. So, actually, I think it's like a comment. I have a question from our FIIC beyond consideration, and practically, we also think about the any possibility to provide more flexibility at national level, because at national level we can use some other language, our own language, to provide more detailed training for our local experts that provide them a more clear image of what gender responsive standard is and how important the gender responsive are, and to make sure that the standards they develop are all gender responsive. So we actually have already developed the technical at ISO level. So how about any requirements for a national NSC or NC that maybe any possibility to include this part into their national level training courses for the experts or the CM or for security risk or share?
Yes.
Please. Thank you, Veja. And it's good to have a fellow JSAG member on this call. First of all, we have from the JSAG already suggested that it becomes mandatory for the technical committees to use the self-assessment form. It's now a question of IT, how to implement it in the systems, but I'm hoping we're going down that line because, as I was explaining, I think that this is something that actually will make a difference in all our standards. The challenge is, of course, to make this happen it's one thing to do when we write new standards, but we need to evaluate the existing standards, so this needs to be taken into account when revising old standards as well. On a national level, I mean, it's like I'm sure that you will agree with me. It's that we are constantly asking our colleagues that this needs to work on a national level as well. But as our membership organizations, not something that I know that the Gender Action Plan is something that both IAC and ISO are working on, and very many national standard bodies have signed on that too. And in that context, I think the more we talk about this, the more likely it will be that it's actually implemented on national level as well.
Thank you. Eleanor?
Yeah. Stella, I'm going to wear another hat now. From Vice President of the Women for Cyber Foundation, and it's the foundation that promotes STEM, so science, technology, engineering, mathematics for girls. And in particular, we make an effort to find cyber jobs that could be fairly for cyber security jobs that is much. I find fascinating, and I agree with Andrea, very refreshing the presentation. Alicia, thank you very much, because this is also a very different angle to the way that we face the standards, and I do believe that your contribution has been fantastic, but also Denise and Karin, and thank you. I think my question is connected to what the previous question was. So I work in on a voluntary basis with this foundation, and they don't know anything about the standards, zero. So what we try to do is to first raise awareness and promote. And I just wanted to know, in this particular standard, if there has been any plan, activity at national level in France. I mean, you have been talking about the Biarritz Declaration and the presidency of the Union, but also if as part of the Gender Action Plan that we also have in Senegal, there has been any specific ambition to engage or to measure the implementation of the gender responsive standard approach and to fix some targets that we can then assess, because as I said before, no target, no business. So we can spend a lot of time developing beautiful ideas, but it's also as important that we are able to assess the success of what we have developed. So any plans to assess the use of the standard?
Let me say, we have a project to have an ambitious communication on this standard. But as you know, in France, we have a little problem with politics, so it was difficult for us to communicate. And for instance, in my case, because I am I'm from the government, it was impossible to communicate. And the project is to launch the standard. We haven't really launched the standard yet. Maybe After will give us some detail, but I'm not sure. Petra, can you give some details on this? But yeah, you must know that it's the political context. It was really difficult for us to have a communication because we are really we have to keep the silence, and so. But I'm positive. I think we can have an ambitious communication on this. Petra, maybe.
Nice to meet you.
Sorry.
I'm the committee manager of the PC 337, so I was working with Denis. And actually the first, by the way, I'm also part of Women for Cyber in France. So I will try to spread awareness. And so the message is applicable everywhere around the world, but we would like to go further. In that right now, thinking about how to go further, you know, and the topic of the indicators or like how to measure the progress is right now under discussion. So we will see soon how it goes. I don't know if this is a response to your question, but this is the plan, and they are still discussing it. So let's see.
Yeah, I think too. That's right. The main question we have in front of you is what next? What next? And we must answer also the question: should we stick on the equality on men and women, or should we widen the perimeters of the area to gender equality? That is to say, let's say LGBT question. I think there is no question. We have to. But as you say, Karen, it depends on the country. So we have to work on a standard we can use depending to the country. But that's the next step. We must. At the beginning, it was very important for me to stick on this equality, because I think if we wanted to widen the question on gender equality, it was really difficult to go to the objective. So that's the reason why France say, okay, we stick on the equality between men and women, and we succeed. So I think it's a good point, but now we must go a bit more. And I think LGBT question is a real question, and we must, I think there are no discussion, we must widen the perimeter of equality between men and women and to gender equality. That's no discussion. After that, we have another question is how and who. How is the question of should we choose PC, switch to PC from TC, from a technical committee? I think it's, again, Petra, you can give us some precision. I think it's the only way to go a bit more. Petra? Yeah?
So it's from project committee into technical committee, because the committee was established just for this one standard, but because even the experts, like Andrea was also part of the working group, we think that there are still many things to work on, like you have seen, so that's why we would like to concentrate into the technical committee, but
and the last question is to use an image of the Olympic is to pass the torch. If you remember, Andrea, I promised at the beginning to work on the equality on the men and women, and then to pass the torch to another country or to another company. That's another question. Sorry.
I think you raised a very important point. I think the targets are so important. We have within the JSAC done 2 surveys to the technical community, trying to measure how aware they are. I think that is a very good goal, because that is frightfully low. And the awareness and the incentive to do something about it is really low. So I think that is a good target that we're still working on, and we're hoping to do another survey. The other one is by using these what do you call forms and the questionnaires that you need to fill in. By collecting those, we will also be able to actually count how many use the forms, and before, even if they're mandatory, and then we will see also how they answer the forms. So there are some targets, but I do think we need, and I fully agree with you, unless we have targets, we're not going to move anywhere.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, please.
Just maybe a very simple question to Alicia. You've seen the figures, I think 7,000 downloads, I saw, of the BSI guidance. Is that something which, from your perspective, in terms of expectations, is that more or less than what you had hoped for?
Hi, I'm just going to repeat the question to make sure I've heard it properly. So it was that we've had 7,000 downloads, right? And you were asking if that's more or less than we hoped for. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Alicia.
Yeah, great, cool. Just wanted to confirm. Yeah, I think when I saw that figure, I had expected that I would have hoped that we would have more. However, for full transparency, this is my first time ever being involved in developing a guide and working with the BSI. And so I didn't know what my expectations were, if that made sense. I think that what I'm seeing through my work is that here in the UK is that there is much more interest in addressing menstrual inequity and gender inequity in the workplace, with a focus on menstrual health specifically. However, it is still a small proportion when we consider how many employers there are across the country. What's been different in the UK, I understand, compared to other countries, especially in Europe, and it would be great to hear reflections on this, is that the UK has had a really big focus on menopause for the last 4 years, I'd say, particularly in the workplace. And that started actually really was sparked by a celebrity called Davina McCall, who did a documentary about her experience with menopause. And that really caused a lot of interest in menopause. And then there has been this focus on menopause in the workplace. But when it comes to periods and menstrual health, that has been a lot, it hasn't really been considered as much. So, but what I understand is in other countries that the periods and menstrual health have had a focus, but people aren't really talking about menopause. So it's been really interesting to notice those differences and actually to understand the power of personal stories in the public media and the impact that that can have on having this shape the workplace. What we say in our work is, you know, we do focus on menstrual health, periods, menopause, but our specialty, we're called Bloody Good Period, is on periods. It's kind of happened a bit backwards, right? Because menopause is what happens, you know, after somebody has been menstruating usually. And so it's now a case of going back and educating around everything that comes before menopause. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. Are there any other questions? Ah, yes, David.
Just going actually on to this question, this is also for Alicia. Do you track the demographics of the people that download that 7,000 figure? More men, women, corporate jobs? What is the age range? Then there's a second question. And the other part is, do you go back to these individuals to give feedback around what motivated them to download the question or the survey?
Yeah, great questions. I won't hold that data, and that will be BSI. So I don't know how standards are developed or guides are developed outside of the UK, but how it works here is the BSI bring together panelists with expertise in this area, and then we work on the guide, but then it's BSI that hold and are responsible for, disseminating that, and will track all of that data. We don't always get insight into that as panelists.
Thanks, Alicia. I'm just going to ask a colleague who's in the room if he can help answer that question. Daniel?
I think it's from the SI, and it is difficult for us to know who is downloading the standard. So this is available on a download link directly from our website, and if you do that, I think it collects some data from users, just basic stuff. But then, of course, it sits in our collection of standards, and so people may well subscribe to British Standards Online or be accessing it through third parties as well. So it's notoriously difficult for any publisher of standards to know who is downloading a standard and why. I will offer one personal perspective. My wife downloaded the standard and shared it in her organisation, and everybody said, "Oh, that's really good, that's really interesting," but nothing is happening because they haven't given it as a responsibility to anyone. So once you do have those barriers to use it, intellectually kind of understand that this is a good thing. But without an organisation then taking that next step and actually deciding, right, we're going to implement this, and somebody will be responsible for driving it, things can fall down. So, sorry, this is like negative note, but it shows there's good intention everywhere. But I don't think my wife downloaded it, didn't answer anything about who you or why you're downloading it. So. Because we publish it as a British standard, it's one of the main ones. And I have to say, in terms of the download numbers, we didn't know either. We didn't know whether it would catch on or not. It has got lots of potential with eventually partners and all things.
Yeah, and just to say as well that not everybody downloads the guide using the form. So somebody might download the guide, say there's a PDF, share it with lots of people. So yeah, it is. I know that it can be hard to track that, and that's why it's important. This guide by itself, it's a useful resource for people to have, but there's a lot of information there. So it's important and beneficial to work with partners to help actually implement those changes. Which is where the work that we do comes in, as well as lots of other people who were responsible for putting the guidance together.
Yes, Eleanor.
That's it. What's his phone also for Daniel? I sent the guide, the reference to the guide to our talent manager in Brussels, and he immediately replied, "Great, I was really considering about taking an action within our next action plan." So thank you very much for the information, and I think it's very important to take action. Yes.
Thanks, Eleanor. I completely agree with you. It's very important, and I think one of the things in ISA on gender equality that we really focus on is the importance of it being somebody's job to actually implement gender equality, because without that, you haven't got anything. And I think the same goes for the menstrual menopause standard as well. It's an excellent point. So has anybody else got any questions? Because I've actually got one, which I've been holding on to, not that it's that exciting, but anyway, possibly more for Karen than anybody else. To me, language is a very powerful tool, and language and the way you use language to children and everybody as they're growing up actually imprints upon them the difference between men and women. And certainly in some languages, the words we use imply that perhaps men are better at certain roles than women. So in the UK, back in, not quite sure exactly the dates, but there was a lady firefighter in London who wanted to change the word confinement to firefighter. And she got a vast amount of negative comments because she wanted to drop the men and make it fighter. I actually think firefighter sounds better myself, but there you go. So the question I have for Karen is ISO considering looking at gender neutral language and how to use gender neutral language? Because I know ANSI has got a gender neutral guide. Are there any plans?
There is not only a plan, there is actually another group that has developed a guidance document on gender neutral language, which is really useful, and it's downloadable on the ISO ID web. So it's on exactly that, how we use language to actually emphasize the differences instead of using it to equalize. I think the challenge here is, just on another note, I think it's great that that exists, and I encourage you all to use it. The challenge here is language. This is a great guide in English. When we go to French, for instance, it's a completely different story, but it's a start, and I think we can all use it and take it home and look at our own languages and see how it can be used, and what some of the contexts are fine in any language, but we do like firefighter or fireman or whatever. That's an example, but some languages uses these nouns with feminine or masculine connotations, and that's another challenge.
Absolutely, thank you very much for that. So quick call for any more questions? If not, if not, I will thank everybody for their participation, and particularly our three speakers, who I think have been absolutely wonderful and really challenged us in our thinking this morning. So thank you all very much for coming along and speaking. It's been very much appreciated.